In this video, we're going to be reviewing the CZ P-09 C Nocturne. That's a mouthful. Just a real quick history about the CZ in case you're not familiar with CZ. In English, CZ basically stands for Czech Armory. And it's one of the top 10 arms manufacturers in the world. CZ USA, the USA extension of CZ, was established in 1997 and moved to Kansas City in 1998. This is the newest version of the P-07, which was originally introduced back in 2009 with further improvements made to it in 2014. Now in 2024 came out this, which is the P-09 C Nocturne version, which now includes, especially if you're familiar with the P-07 model, a number of improvements. A couple of these include, for example, better grip texturing than the P-07. There is now a optics cut for either a Holosun K-type or Shield RMS K-series footprint with no plates. There is also now a day-night green luminescent 3-dot sight, and these are also elevated so that you can look through a optics that you would have on the gun without having to replace the sights. You also have an enhanced slide stop and decocker controls, so these are a little bit more comfortable. There is now a single notch on the 1913 rail system. There's also increased front cocking serrations. You can see them both at the top as well as the side. As well as there is a small loaded chamber indicator here that sticks out when loaded just slightly. As you can see, it's just this little silver metal piece here. Now it has the barrel on this gun is a 3.74 inch cold hammer forged barrel, and it is a hammer fired system. So if you're not familiar with these, most people, since the release of Glocks a number of years ago, many decades ago actually, striker fire systems have become pretty much the norm for many people in the marketplace. But some people still prefer the hammer-fired systems, especially people who start out with striker-fired pistols like a Glock and now want to evolve into something that has, more options and more versatility. And ultimately, as a result of that, it requires a little bit more training, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, P-09 utilizes a trigger system called the Omega double single action trigger system, that was used on both the 07 and now utilized on the 09. And what this trigger system allows you to do, if you're not familiar, for example, with double single actions, by the way, all my handguns were safety checked before the video began, is you have a strong, longer double action pull, and then you switch to single action. That is the double single action system. Now, when I received this handgun, you're going to notice something first off. The double action pull, and I've upgraded this, which I'll talk about in a moment, the double action pull on this was actually pretty stiff. Now they will loosen up over rounds, but you're going to notice that. And of course, when you get to the single action is not so bad, but the double action was very, very stiff. And as a result of that, what a lot of people do is they're going to make some upgrades to this handgun when they get them. And they will use, for example, the most common things that people do is they'll buy what are called spring kits. And they'll do these from companies like Cajun Gunworks and Carbo, and they usually cost only about $30 and allows you to change out, for example, the mainspring and a couple springs here to really get the trigger pulls to a level that people ultimately want them to do. You can also go so far as to go to the, for example, the Pro package where they can switch out the hammer and other types of components on here. Or you can even do polishing where you go in here, you disassemble the handgun, and you can polish components like the sear and other things like that, which is what I do. So in my case, what I did is I buy the $30 spring kits, which I did with my P-01 as well. And then I basically disassembled the handgun and then used flits and my Dremel to polish up the components to do my trigger jobs on here. Now, if you need help in knowing how to do this, there is a video I'll link to below by Carbo. That is one of the best that I've seen out there on the internet today. And if you're relatively handy and comfortable disassembling handguns, you should be able to do exactly what I'm talking about here, which is being able to do a trigger job, change out the springs and things of that nature. If you're not handy, you're probably just going to want to take this to a gunsmith, because even though it is doable to make these changes, you have to kind of know what you're doing. And if you don't, and you watch the video and it seems like too much for you, then I would suggest taking it to a gunsmith. Now, after all the work that I did on my P-09, on my lineman gauge, my double action pull, it comes in almost exactly at 5 pounds, which is exactly what I want my double actions to be. Double actions I typically want between 5 to 7 pounds. And then the single action pull on here now is clocked in my lineman gauge at 1.7 pounds, which is just absolutely perfect. And again, that's the benefit of a double single action system is if you want a really light trigger, but to be able to carry it safety, that's when you have it in the single action mode. And then you've got a very short trigger pull and an excellent trigger. Now, a couple things about this, the controls. First off, you're going to notice the decocker on here is an ambi control system. And the other benefit of the Omega system, which I really like, is the fact that you can switch out these decockers. They give you a second set of safeties. So you can replace these as a 1911 safety. So instead of the ability to be able to decock your handgun, if you're one of those people that likes to carry it cocked and locked, they give you the replacement in here where you can basically carry it like a 1911 and basically operate this as only as a safety and not as a decocker. So you have both options in the Omega system, which is one of the reasons why I really like it, and it is included within the 09. Now, a couple other things you're going to notice on the grips, there is a grip module back here, and this grip module, there are 3 that come within the box. The standard one I had on here was the small, which actually I've got an average size hand and it fits my hand perfectly. But you can change these out, especially if you have a bigger paw, and you can add some size onto these as well. All you have to do is you push down on this lanyard pin here and then drive out the pin. This slides off and then you can put on the new back straps. They also have nice pronounced finger tabs as well. So when you're not firing the gun, you can keep your finger index on the tabs. Now, as far as weight's concerned, let's just take a look at how this gun stacks up to other guns within the marketplace today that would be comparable to it. So in this case, I come in at around 1 pound 11 ounces with a unloaded magazine. Now, if I compare this, for example, to my SP-01, this comes at 1 pound 12 ounces. So it's 1 ounce more than the P-09. So you would think that since this is an aluminum frame and this is a polymer, it would be less, but actually it's almost the exact same. Now, this is the SIG SP-2022, again, 1 pound 12 ounces. So it comes in just similar in size to my SP-01. And then I'm also going to put this on the Glock 19, which doesn't have a magazine, but it's the same weight with my light on here. This is a little bit less. This is coming in at 1.6 pounds. So the Glock 19 is a little bit lighter, but you can see on the double single actions, these are pretty comparable in weight amongst all of the ones that are out there. Now, as far as accuracy is concerned, this is where I was a little surprised when I fired the gun. So the first thing I want to show you is at 15 yards, both these targets are 15 yards. This is the group that I fired initially at 15 yards with the P-09. Now, comparing this to, for example, the SIG SP-2022, which I fired right here. So very similar type of groups. Now, if I compare that, for example, to the groups I fired out of my SP-01, again, 15 yards, this is the P-09, and these are the results of my P-01 Omega. A little bit different distribution, but about the same type of grouping without both of them. In other words, this is a very accurate handgun, and I was really surprised at the accuracy, especially out of the box. These were fired even before I made the improvements to the trigger springs. Now, another thing you're going to notice about the CZs if you've never fired them before is unlike other handguns that are out there where the slide rides on the frame, meaning that the majority of the bulk is the slide itself, on the CZs, they actually ride inside the frame. So you're going to see the rails are inside the frame here. So the frame stands up higher and then the slide is actually not as tall. And that's one of the differences on here. So when you see the action of this handgun, you're going to notice that it's sliding on the inside there. Now, some of the benefits for this is it can help reduce some of the weight of the slide, but more importantly, it provides really, really good stability and then also good finger indexing on your handgun. So if you ever have, for example, a handgun where your fingers, etc., are hitting the slide while it's moving, this might, again, be another really nice option for you as well. Now, as far as disassembly of this handgun, it's actually pretty easy, but you just a little nuance to it. There are 2 notches here, one in the frame and one on the slide. And in order to disassemble it, you need to move those notches up so that they are in alignment, and then you need to push this pin through. So one of the things I always recommend when I disassemble these is just use the back of your magazine to get that started, especially if it's newer. And then you can pull the pin out, and then what I do is I pull the slide forward. Now the slide, again, very similar to other types of, striker fire and other pistols you're going to see, where you can easily take off, again, the spring, the barrel, etc., and it's very similar component. So that is basically how you break down a handgun like this. And then to reassemble it, and again, remember the slide's going in the frame, is you line it up, line the pin down, push them forward, and you're good to go. So that is the basic assembly and disassembly of the CZs. Now, what are some of the things that I really like about this handgun? The first thing, as I mentioned before, the double single action system, the Omega trigger system, I really like on the CZs. And I've talked about that before as well in my SP-01 reviews. The other thing I really like about this are the ergonomics. The ergonomics in my hand are excellent. So compared to, for example, Glocks that are just a little bit fatter and a little bit blockier, these are a little bit more contoured and a little bit more narrow. And at least for me with regular size hands, this is absolutely fantastic. I love the feel of it. The only thing that could benefit from me a little bit would be as if it had some slight palm swells, but again, it's not that big of a deal. I understand why they do it this way. The other thing about this gun is the finishes on here are really nice. So when you start looking at the finishes of the metal, etc., again, everything on here is really top notch. I also like the option that you can add optics to this, which you couldn't do on the 07 model. So that's a nice benefit of the 09. Another great thing about the CZs are prices. These are very affordable handguns. So for example, if you compare this with a optics cut to for example, a Glock 19 MOS with an optics cut, current prices on this handgun are about $100 less than the Glock MOS. And in my opinion, you're getting just as good a quality, if not in some cases better. The other thing I like about this gun is it has a relatively low bore axis. So one of the things people love about Glocks are the bore axis is really low to the hand. Well, I get almost the same type of bore axis here with a nice beaver tail compared to, for example, a SIG. So a SIG P226, 220, one of the knocks people sometimes have is how high the bore axis is, where the hand sits, whereas, for example, on here it actually sits really nice. So it makes a very nice recoil impulse. The other thing I like about the 09 is it can also take P07 and P10 magazines, as well as you can also buy extended magazines like these 19 round magazines will also work in here as well. So you have a lot of versatility with this. Now, when you look at one of the improvements with the 09 is there's a notch cut here on the side of the handle, and then there's a fill here on the magazines, which look really cool. The one thing you just need to remember is if you buy P909 magazines, they will not work in your 07 and your P10s because of this notch, this floor plate here that will not allow them to fit. However, these are not present on the 07 and P10 magazines, which means they will work just fine on your 09. Another nice thing about the 09 coming out is it's very similar in size, almost identical to the 07, which means if you're currently utilizing any holsters for a P07 or looking for holsters and don't want to wait, a lot of times when new handguns come out, it takes a while for the vendors to get new holsters out. You can use these on P07 holsters. Now, I have not owned a P07, so I don't have a lot of holsters to test this on. If anybody has any experience with this, you can certainly share it in the comments below just to help everybody out. But my understanding is if you buy a P07 holster, they should work with the P09. Another thing I really like about the CZs, including my P01, etc., is reliability. These are extremely reliable handguns. Now, this one just recently came out, but this is really functionally the same handgun as an 07. And I know people have fired tens of thousands of rounds for their 07, and they swear that it's the most reliable handgun they've had. And a lot of people, you know, when they buy Glocks, they're like, hey, the thing always goes, it always goes bang, right? It's easy and reliable. CZs are right on par with that from everybody I know that have owned these for a long time, including my own experiences of working with CZs. I've never once had a problem. Now, what are some of the things that I don't like about the 09? The first thing, as I mentioned before, if you get the stock triggers with the stock trigger springs, that double action pull, that mainspring is going to be real stiff. Now, these supposedly lighten up over time. I change them out. I'm not one of these people that want to do a couple thousand rounds to the gun just to get things broken in. I would prefer to have things be a little bit smoother when I start out. If there's one thing about this gun is you're going to notice when you buy it new is that spring is stiff when you first buy it. So again, remember you have options here, as I talked about earlier, to change out these springs at a minimum to at least get the springs down to where you might want them. Another thing you're going to notice about this handgun is, like on the SP-01, there is a lanyard loop here. Now, you know, 99.99% of Americans are never going to use a lanyard loop. But the reality is it doesn't really matter on the SP-01 because why? It sits below the plate of the magazine. However, that's not the case on the 09. In this case, it protrudes below that. So the problem is if you're used to slapping magazines in your handgun, you're hitting that lanyard loop, which I really don't like. And quite honestly, one of the things that I wish that CZ would do, hopefully if they see this video or other things, is they need to really replace this on the American sales of these. Nobody really needs this. Or if you really want to sell it, just add a flush mainspring plug, because you can buy these aftermarket. And by the way, if you have an 09, you can order these. Just look them up online, the flush mainspring plugs. And what it'll do is it'll put a plug in here without the lanyard, and then you don't have to worry about slapping into this. But my concern is if you get to the point where you're slapping and it becomes uncomfortable, look what might happen. It might not ride home the magazine, right? You want to make sure you're always riding that home. So that's one thing I would change on here as well. The other thing about the sights is these are green illumination. They're not tritium type sights. And basically what this means is they're okay during the day and okay at night, but not really great in either one. So for example, when you shoot these, if you want to be able to see at night and have them glow bright, they're the ones that you typically need to kind of charge them, right? And if you're just stepping out of a dark situation or holster or whatever, they might not be charged, right? So the reality is they're not really great for day and not really great for night. They work great if you're running an optics system, but if you're somebody that really wants good sights, they're okay, but they honestly, I would have preferred to have at least white sights on here or X-ray or something better than currently is offered on here. But they're definitely serviceable, and as you saw from my accuracy charts, they're great. It's one of those things where if you're one of those people that have a hard time picking up your sights, you might have a hard time picking these up. Another thing, just a small little gripe, is the owner's manual. The owner's manual has a nice parts diagram, but that's about it. Everything else in here is pretty much wordy. And if you're wanting to change out, for example, the decock or do a safety and other things like that, you're not really going to figure out how to do that in here, which is why I provide you that link below to the video to show you how to disassemble and assemble these on a trigger job, or even to change out your decock or do a safety, because really this manual does not help you do that. And it's not like a Glock. There's a little bit of nuances you have to know when you assemble and disassemble that. And I wish it was covered in the owner's manual, but it's not. And then the final thing, my only little gripe, and this applies to a lot of these handguns now, is there's limited optics footprint here. These will only work with the Holosun case type, as well as the Shield RMS mounts. Now, again, this is not the only manufacturer that's had this problem. A lot of manufacturers will include plates that you can switch them out on. And then, you know, that's one of the reasons why I tend to stay away from these red dot sights now. And I'm still kind of a traditional iron sight person, but once they become more standardized, I'll probably start looking at them more. But at least in my case, there is a limit to this, which is if you have one that you might have bought for another handgun, it might not work if it's not a K-type or Shield RMS type mount. So that's my only other gripe here as well. Another thing you need to be aware of with the CZs is do not dry fire these repeatably without what's called a snap cap. And a snap cap basically is just a dummy round. And the reason why that is there's a pin that goes through here called a firing pin retaining pin. It's a roll pin. And what happens is your firing pin has a notch in this handgun, and it's similar to the SP-01 as well. And what happens is when you dry fire your handgun, you're dry firing that firing pin forward through that notch, and if there's nothing to catch it or to stop it on the end, like for example a dummy round or a real bullet, what's going to happen over time is that firing pin retaining roll pin is going to deform. It's going to ultimately need replacing over time if you continue to dry fire this handgun without a snap cap. So one of the recommendations I always have for people when they buy CZs is when you're not keeping the gun loaded, or if you're just in training, Always keep a snap cap in your handgun so that any time that you're dry firing or practicing with it, etc., at least you know that you're not doing damage to the firing pin retaining roll pin. And then the final thing I would say about this handgun is the recoil. The recoil on this, it's a typical polymer gun, which means you're going to have a little bit more of your weight distributed on the slide, but it is more pronounced than, for example, your SP-01. So if you're one of these people that fire an 01, you're going to notice the difference with this. It's just a little bit snappier, but again, it's no different than any of the other polymer type handguns that I've fired. So who would like these? Well, the first thing is, the people that hate Glock ergonomics, and you guys all know who you are, right? And I'm one of them, right? I've had to doctor up these Glocks for years, whatever. But if you pick up a Glock and it just feels blocky and just doesn't recoil comfortably in your hand, etc., you're probably going to really like this handgun because of just the ergonomics alone. To me, these ergonomics are superior to a Glock, which really isn't saying much. Most handguns now are superior to Glocks in that regard. Also, if you want a safer carry option, if you're one of these people that wants to carry a round in the chamber, but ultimately you're worried about, hey, there's no safety on my handgun, or it's a light trigger pull, etc. That's one of the benefits of a single double action is at short distance, you have a long, harder trigger pull that is very safe to carry, and that's why a lot of people really like these. And again, if you're trying to shoot and you have time to set up for longer, more accurate shots, that's where the benefit of that single action comes in, which is you got a very, very nice light trigger pull. Again, you have the benefit of safety as well as performance. And then the final thing is, if you already own a CZ, and people who try or own CZs love CZs, you're probably going to like this handgun. And you know who you are. And if you have never tried a CZ, I highly suggest that you do it. Because ultimately, people that own CZs, they own a lot of them, because they're really, really well-made handguns. And like most people, I discovered CZs later in my shooting life. And the more I shoot them, the more I'm actually preferring them over other handguns that I have. Now, the CZ P-01, which I have here on the table, separate review on, is still one of my absolute favorite handguns that I have. But the P-09, the more I shoot this, it's now sitting on the rack right next to my P-320s as carry options, because the more I shoot this handgun, the more I really like it. And quite honestly, if this had came out at the time, for example, when the Glocks came out, I would have bought this over the Glocks all day. But that's just my preference. But in the end, it is a great handgun, great quality, comes from a great lineage with the 07 line, which made a bunch of improvements to the 09, very affordable and fantastic. And if you're one of these people that started out and just got a simple striker fire Glock or things like that and really want to improve your shooting and have more versatility with what you shoot, this might be a great option for you. Highly recommended. And that is the review of the CZ P-09 C Nocturne. If you like this video or you like this channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.